Hello and welcome to the third video on C# Programming Fundamentals. Today we're going to learn about the important world of arrays, lists, and tuples. An array is a series of elements of the same type placed in contiguous memory locations that can be individually referenced by adding an index to the name. Arrays can be one-dimensional or multi-dimensional. At its simplest, a one-dimensional array is like a list of items, with each item in the list being ordered by a hidden index. So here we are creating an array of colors: red, yellow, green, and blue. You can see that we're using the square brackets here to denote that it's an array. And then when we add the values, we use the curly brackets, and we have commas between each item here. So string colors equals red, yellow, green, blue, console.writeLine, and then I can print out any of the values by using just the index here. So if you look down here, we can see that colors is an array. Red is index position 0. Computers start counting at 0. Yellow is 1, green is 2, and blue is 3. So when we said colors 2 at the top here, that would print out green because that is the second index value. If we want to declare an empty array, we can use the following syntax. So double square brackets balance. Easy enough. Declaring an array does not initialize the array in memory. When the array variable is initialized, you can assign values to the array. To initialize a blank array of given size, we can use this format: double balance equals new double square brackets 10. And that would create a blank array called balance, which can have a total of 10 values in it from 0 to 9. We can also assign values to individual array elements by using the index number. So balance 0 equals 56.56. We'll set the first value to 56.56. As we saw before with the colors example, we can assign values to the array at the time of declaration. So double balance equals, and then we've got the set of numbers that we want in the curly brackets. Not strings this time, so we don't need any speech marks. With numbers, we don't need speech marks. The same with any sort of variable type. And of course, we can overwrite any existing values just by saying something like balance square brackets index position equals, and then setting a new value. So in this case, we are going to replace 3,421 with 3,765.65. Note, arrays are of fixed length. We can't just add another element to it. So in this case, if I try and say balance 3 equals this, well, there is no fourth element in the array. So when I try and add that number, it will generate an index out of range exception. Also note, the elements in an array must be of the same data type. So in this case, this is not going to work because Bob is obviously a string and not a double. To loop through an array, it's very simple to use a for loop. So I want to go through the array balance. I can just say for int loop equals 0, a loop less than or equal to 2, a loop plus plus, console.writeLine balance loop, and that will go through position 0, position 1, position 2, and then stop, printing out the values at 1 per line. Nice and easy. I can also use a for each loop, which is a little bit neater. So for each double num in balance, console.writeLine num. It just goes through your array, takes out each element value, stores it as num, and then in this case prints it. For exams, please check if you can use for each. Some exam syllabuses tend to prefer for loops being used. If you use a for each, you may not get credit. So please check with the syllabus or your teacher. As we've seen, arrays can be one-dimensional, but we can also have two-dimensional or multi-dimensional arrays. So if a one-dimensional array is just a basic list of items, you can think of a two-dimensional list like a table, like this example here. And here we have a table format that has kind of rows and columns. So here, each individual row would be like its own list, and we'd have all those lists inside another list. So this would be a two-dimensional list. So would our noughts and crosses board over here, An example of a multi-dimensional list would be something like a Rubik's Cube, where we need to push this into 3 dimensions. But don't worry, generally in any kind of exam syllabus in the UK, you only go up to 2D lists. So how do I do that in C#? Well, to declare and initialize a blank 2D array of given size, I use the following format. So I've got the comma here to denote they're going to be 2 different values. So int my array equals new int, and then I've got like the number of lists I'm going to have inside my 2-dimensional list, and this is the number of elements that are going to be in each list. So I'm going to have 3 lists inside a greater list, and each list is going to have 4 values. If I'm going to create it and initialize it with values, I could lay it out something like this. So again, it's a 2-dimensional list there. And I generally lay them out like this. I've got my opening set of brackets and my closing set of brackets for the 2-dimensional list. Inside that, I've got my 3 actual lists. And each list has an open and closing set of brackets. And I separate them with commas. So you can see I've got 3 lists inside my list, and I've got 4 values for each list. In terms of index positions, well, this would be 0, 1, and 2. And then we've got 0, 1, 2, and 3 in the usual way above. And I can use a combination of those 2 values to locate any specific element in my 2-dimensional array. To iterate through a 2-dimensional list, we can use for loops. We can loop through the rows and the columns, or the columns and the row in this way. Just make sure they're nicely nested together. Again, kind of easier and neater to use a for each if that is acceptable for you. It's great in your coding, might not be suitable in the exam, but here I can just go through every single number in the numbers array with just one for each. Nice and simple and elegant. Now we're going to move on to lists. So an array that we've already looked at is a fairly primitive data structure. A list is like an array but with lots of extra features built onto it to make it a lot easier to use. So definition, it's a resizable array. It can store a variable number of elements in an expandable collection. Unlike an array, it changes its size as needed on its own. The list type offers many powerful methods. We can add elements, we can count elements, we can locate elements with things like index of or find. Lists are especially powerful when we don't know exactly how many values our array is going to hold, because lists are resizable, they can be multiple data types, all kinds of things that we can do within a list that we can't do with an array. We can create a list and populate it like so in C#. So list angular bracket string employee equals new list angular bracket string, and then we've got the usual parentheses. And this will create a list called employees. We can use then the .add method to add our employees to the list, and we can print it out exactly the same way that we would with an array by giving the index value. So employees1 would print out Leela from our list of employees. Again, we can iterate through a list in exactly the same way that we would an array. Again, for each is a little bit simpler and more elegant, but you might want to use a for loop. And lists have lots of useful functions built into them in C# and in other languages. So I can just call the name of the list and use .remove. Nice and easy to get rid of a value. I can find the index position of an element by using .index of. So returns a number that tells you the index where that's found. We can remove an index position by using remove at. We can insert a value and increase the size of our list by using insert. And we can sort it by using .sort. There are lots of other lovely methods that we can use with lists to make them really useful in our coding. Tuples are kind of like immutable lists. So once you create a tuple, you can't modify it. It's like a constant. So they're useful when we have values that we want to access by using an index position, but must not be changed once they're set. So here I'm creating a tuple to hold the horizontal and vertical resolution of maybe a screen or a window or something like that. And once it's created, I can no longer overwrite or change those values. They're set. So again, like a constant is to a variable, a tuple is to a list. Again, just to note, while lists and tuples can be really useful, be careful about using them in your written exams. So myself at the school that I teach in, we do OCR, and in OCR you generally want to stick to arrays and not use lists and tuples, because that's arrays are the most basic data type. They're supported by every programming language, so that's what they expect to see when you write answers. But certainly for your own programming, lists are really useful. And here are some activities for you. So have a look here. We've got 3 programs, and then I'll go through the solutions. Number 1, write a program to choose 6 random lottery numbers from 1 to 49. Store them in an array and print out the array as well. Number 2, write a program using an array that picks a random day of the week. So store the days of the week in an array and then just randomly pick one and print it out. And then number 3, write a program to ask the user for the names and marks of 10 pupils. Store the results in a 2-dimensional array, 10 rows, 2 columns, and display the average mark. Note, because all the data in an array must be the same data type, store the marks as a string value and convert them when you need to perform calculations. Have you programmed all those? Fantastic. Let's start going through them one at a time, and I'll show you my solution. If you've done it differently, that's fine, as long as it works. So number 1, pretty simple. New random, object created, generate 6 random numbers in a for loop, store them in the array, loop through the array, and print out all the values. Nice and simple. Moving on, number 2. Again, put all the days of the week in an array, generate a random number, print out from the array using that random number. Nice and simple. Then number 3 is a little bit more complicated, so have a look at this. Again, it's just making use of for loops, making use of your arrays, making sure you calculate all the values correctly before you display them. Well, I hope that was useful. I'll be back with another C# video when I get a chance. In the meantime, good luck with your studies. Goodbye.